Let's start the fourth part. Please like and subscribe the channel. Thanks for your support. The names that wouldn't stay buried. The list didn't look dangerous at first. It was just 10 names, 10 women, typed in a plain document with no formatting, no emphasis, no explanation. But what it represented was anything but simple. Each name carried a history, a story that had been buried beneath silence, manipulation, and carefully crafted illusions. These were not strangers. These were lives that had intersected with Kody's in secret, while cameras rolled, while promises were made, while the world watched a version of reality that had been edited into something unrecognizable. Some of those women had walked away quietly. Others hadn't been so lucky. At the bottom of the list, there was a single sentence. "I don't expect anything, but maybe you can help them." When Robyn read it, she didn't cry. There were no tears, no trembling hands, no collapse under the weight of it. What she felt instead was something far more powerful: anger. Not the reckless kind that burns fast and fades, but a steady, grounded anger. The kind that sharpens your thoughts and steadies your voice. The kind that refuses to let injustice pass quietly. Because those names weren't just names. They were evidence that the story wasn't over. Pieces of damage still existed, unacknowledged, unresolved, and drifting like wreckage after a storm. And Robyn knew in that moment she wouldn't let them disappear. She picked up her phone. Angela answered on the second ring. Within a week, they had tracked down 6 of the women. It wasn't easy. Some had changed numbers. Some had moved cities. One nearly refused to speak at all. But slowly, carefully, conversations began. Stories unfolded. Patterns emerged. Out of those 6, 4 agreed to speak publicly. 1 agreed to file charges. That single decision changed everything. Because when the case reopened, it didn't come back the way anyone expected. This time, it wasn't about Kody. It was about the system that protected him. A system under fire. When the headlines returned, they looked different. Kody's face wasn't front and center anymore. Instead, new names appeared, names that had once operated quietly behind the scenes. The executive producer, the showrunner, 2 network attorneys, all now under federal review. Angela stood outside the courthouse, a thick file in her hands, the weight of it visible not just in paper, but in purpose. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out questions. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Justice doesn't stop at one man," she said. "It follows the enablers. It follows the system that allowed him to thrive." Robyn stood beside her. "Silence is no longer an option." Christine added quietly, but firmly, "The truth always finds its way to the surface." Inside the courtroom, the tension was immediate. The accused tried to deflect responsibility. They spoke of creative decisions, of editorial interpretation, of audience expectations. They claimed ignorance. They claimed distance from the reality behind the scenes. But the evidence told a different story. One of the former editors took the stand. His testimony shifted the entire room. He admitted, under oath, that he had been instructed to manipulate footage, to shape narratives in a way that made the wives appear unstable, emotional, broken. So that Kody would appear strong, controlled, admirable. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Because this wasn't just television anymore. This was something darker, something deliberate. Psychological manipulation, packaged and sold as entertainment. The verdict that changed everything. Weeks passed. Testimonies stacked on top of one another. Documents surfaced. Emails revealed intent. And then the ruling came. The court found in favor of the women. Damages were awarded. Policies were rewritten. But more importantly, a precedent was set. Something had shifted, not just legally, but culturally. The idea that reality could be constructed so carefully, so deceptively, was no longer abstract. It had been proven. That night, there was no celebration. No press. No statements. Just a quiet gathering at Christine's cabin. Snow rested lightly on the trees outside, soft and still. Inside, the air was calm, almost unfamiliar in its peace. Robyn looked out the window for a long time before speaking. "I never thought peace would feel this strong," she said. Angela gave a small, knowing smile. "It's not strange," she replied. "It's just new." Christine leaned back in her chair, her voice steady. And we earned every second of it. They didn't talk about the trial. They didn't talk about Kody. Instead, they talked about the future. About the girls who had watched. About their daughters. Their nieces. The audience who had once believed everything they saw. They'll know better now, Robyn said. Because we spoke, Angela added. Christine finished the thought. Because we refused to stay small. Reclaiming identity days later, something shifted inside Robyn. For the first time in years, she sat down to write. Not for the media. Not for a statement. Not even for anyone else. Just for herself. She wrote a letter not to the woman she was, but to the girl she used to be. The one who had signed that first contract. The one who believed in something that, in hindsight, had never truly belonged to her. She wrote, "You're about to give up everything for a dream that isn't yours. You'll mistake control for love. You'll wear guilt like it's part of your identity. But one day, you'll remember who you are. And when you do, you will rise." When she finished, she didn't share it. She folded the letter, placed it inside a journal, and locked it away. Because the healing wasn't in being heard. It was in finally understanding. Voices that refused to be silenced. Angela stepped into a different kind of spotlight. Her first lecture drew a full auditorium, students, professionals, people from all walks of life. When she walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. But she raised her hand. "I'm not here because I'm brave," she said. The room quieted. "I'm here because I was broken, and I chose not to stay that way." The words landed heavily, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just real. Christine found her own path. She launched a podcast. Not polished. Not scripted. Just real conversations, stories from survivors who had never been given space to speak before. In her first episode, she said, "You don't have to be strong to leave. You just have to believe you deserve more." The response was immediate. Messages flooded in. Stories poured out. People who had stayed silent for years suddenly found words. And slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The world stopped calling them the sister wives, and started calling them what they truly were. Women. With names. With voices. With power. A new beginning. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It came slowly through small changes. Warmer air. Longer days. Tiny buds pushing through cold earth. Healing worked the same way. Quiet. Gradual. But undeniable. Robyn, Angela, and Christine found themselves not at the beginning of something new, but deep within it. Rooted. Grounded. Still growing. One evening, they gathered again at the cabin. No crisis. No urgency. Just a question. What now? This time, it wasn't asked in fear. It was asked with curiosity. Christine was the first to answer. "I think we should build something," she said. "Something real. Something that helps women before they ever need a courtroom." Robyn listened carefully. Angela leaned forward. "What would it look like?" Christine shook her head slightly. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I know what it feels like." She paused. "It feels like not needing permission to trust yourself." The room fell quiet. Not with uncertainty, but with recognition. Because they all knew that feeling. And, for the first time, they were ready to build it. Building what they never had. The idea didn't arrive fully formed. It didn't come with a business plan or a polished mission statement. It began as a feeling, quiet but persistent. A shared understanding between three women who had lived through something they couldn't unsee, and who now carried a responsibility they couldn't ignore. In the weeks that followed that night at the cabin, the question, "What now?" slowly turned into something more tangible. Conversations became meetings. Meetings became outlines. Outlines became action. They met around kitchen tables, in small offices, over late-night calls that stretched past exhaustion. There were notebooks filled with scattered thoughts, voice memos recorded in moments of sudden clarity, and long pauses where none of them spoke, because what they were trying to build required more than ideas. It required honesty. And honesty takes time. Christine led with instinct. She reached out to shelters, counselors, transition coaches, people who had been doing the work long before headlines ever caught up. She didn't come in with authority. She came in with questions. "What's missing?" she asked. The answers were consistent. Women didn't just need a place to go. They needed a way to understand what they were experiencing before it became something they had to escape from. Angela took on the legal framework. Where others saw emotion, she saw structure. She began drafting policies, mapping out protections, connecting their vision to systems that already existed, but often failed to reach the people who needed them most. "The law can protect," she said one evening, looking over a stack of notes, "but only if people know how to use it." Robyn stepped into something she never expected. Creation. Not survival. Not defense. Creation. She became the voice behind how the vision would be seen and felt. She shaped the message, the tone, the identity of what they were building. Not polished or perfect, but real. She wanted women to look at it and recognize themselves. Not as victims, but as people standing at the edge of something better. The birth of the Safe House Network eventually, the scattered pieces came together. They gave it a name. The Safe House Network. It wasn't just a shelter system. It wasn't just legal aid. It wasn't just storytelling. It was all of it, woven together into something that addressed not just the moment of escape, but everything that came before and after. It was designed for women in emotionally and spiritually coercive relationships, those situations that don't always leave visible scars, but slowly reshape a person from the inside out. The network offered access to legal guidance without intimidation, transitional housing that felt human, not institutional education on coercive control, and emotional manipulation, safe spaces for storytelling, without judgment or editing, community support built on understanding, not assumptions, but more than anything, it offered something many of them had never been given: validation. The first retreat took place 6 months later. There were no banners, no media, no grand opening, just 20 women. They came from different places, different backgrounds, different stages of their journeys. Some had already left. Some were still deciding. Some didn't even know what leaving would look like yet. But they all carried the same quiet question: is what I'm feeling real? The first circle, the retreat, didn't begin with speeches. It began with a circle. No microphones. No hierarchy. No introductions filled with titles or credentials. Just people sitting together, unsure, but willing. At first, no one spoke. Silence stretched across the room, not uncomfortable, but heavy with everything that hadn't yet been said. Then one woman broke it. Her name was Laura. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "He never hit me," she said. "But he made me forget my favorite color." The words lingered in the air. And I think that broke me more than anything. No one rushed to respond. No one tried to fix it. Angela reached over slowly and placed her hand on Lara's. "I forgot mine too," she said quietly. Robyn nodded. "I only remembered it last year." Christine exhaled softly. "Mine changed the moment I left." Something shifted in that moment. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. The room breathed. For the first time, many of them felt understood, not explained, not analyzed, just understood. Reclaiming what was lost, the days that followed weren't structured like traditional programs. There were no rigid schedules forcing transformation. Instead, there were experiences. Yoga sessions where women reconnected with bodies they had learned to ignore. Journaling exercises that uncovered thoughts long buried under fear. Group discussions where stories overlapped in ways that felt almost surreal. Art therapy sessions where emotions took form without needing words. Legal workshops that translated intimidating systems into something accessible and empowering. But the most powerful element wasn't planned. It was the conversations that happened in between. Over meals. During walks. Late at night, when the world was quiet and honesty felt safer. By the end of the retreat, something remarkable had happened. Not everyone had answers. But everyone had clarity. And clarity is where change begins. Before leaving, each woman wrote a letter to herself. Not about the past, but about the future. Those letters would be mailed back to them 6 months later, a reminder of who they were becoming, not who they had been. As they prepared to leave, one woman stood up, holding her letter tightly. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but something closer to relief. I don't think I'm scared of silence anymore, she said. The room responded with quiet applause. Not loud, not performative, just real. A movement begins to grow. After the retreat, the three of them stood together watching the sunset. No words were needed at first. Then Christine spoke. I think this is the most important thing I've ever done. Angela nodded. It's what we were meant to do. Robyn looked out at the horizon. We're building something no one can take from us. And they were right. Because what started as one retreat didn't stay small. Over the next year, the Safe House network began to expand. First into 5 cities. Then 10. Then 20. Women who had once watched their lives unfold on screen, people who had consumed their pain as entertainment, began showing up in a different way. As donors. As volunteers. As allies. The narrative was changing. Not just for them, but because of them. Speaking on their own terms, the media returned eventually. But this time, it was different. No one spoke for them. No one edited their words. They told their stories on their own terms. When Robyn appeared on a morning show and was asked what she would say to her younger self, she didn't hesitate. I'd tell her to trust her silence, she said. It's not weakness. It's a warning. Angela, speaking at a legal conference, reframed everything people thought they understood about support systems. We don't just give women a place to stay, she said. We give them their voice back. Christine, after recording an episode of her growing podcast, was approached by a young girl. How did you find the courage to leave? She asked. Christine smiled gently. I stopped waiting for permission to want more. Those words traveled. Through classrooms. Through courtrooms. Through conversations that had never been possible before. And each time they were repeated, something shifted. Another woman questioned her reality. Another person chose to listen. Another door quietly opened. The power of being there one afternoon, after a seminar, a woman approached Angela. She hesitated at first, her hands shaking slightly. I'm still with him, she admitted. But now I know I'm not crazy. Angela didn't rush her. Didn't push. Didn't overwhelm her with solutions. She simply nodded. Knowing is the first door, she said. Leaving is the second. She paused, meeting her eyes. You'll walk through it when you're ready. And I'll be here. That became something more than a sentence. It became a promise. Not of rescue, but of presence. Because real support doesn't force change. It holds space for it. 1 year later, they didn't throw a big celebration. No stage. No speeches. No audience. Just the 3 of them. Back at the cabin. A simple meal. A quiet evening. And 3 candles. Robyn lit the first. Survival, she said. We made it through, not because we were brave, but because we had to. Angela lit the second. Healing. We didn't just survive. We changed. Christine lit the third. Legacy. We didn't build this for us. We built it for them. They sat in silence for a while after that. Not empty silence. Full silence. The kind that only exists when something real has been built. Later that night, Christine read an email aloud. It was from a woman in another country. I don't know if I'll ever leave, it said. But knowing you exist makes me feel less alone. No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. Because that was the proof. Not headlines. Not recognition. But impact. A truth that changed everything before going to sleep. Robyn said something quietly, almost to herself. I used to think the biggest thing I'd ever do was stand beside a man. She paused. And now I know, the biggest thing I'll ever do is stand beside myself. Angela looked at her. That's the truth that saves lives. Christine nodded softly. That's the truth that saved mine. And that night, for the first time in a long time, they didn't dream about the past. They dreamed about what was still to come. Because their story wasn't ending. It was expanding. The echo that became a movement, what followed wasn't fame. It wasn't headlines or interviews or the kind of attention that fades as quickly as it arrives. What followed were footsteps. Quiet at first. Almost unnoticeable. Then steady. Then impossible to ignore. Footsteps of women walking away from lives that once felt inescapable. Footsteps of daughters learning, sometimes for the first time, that instinct was something to trust, not silence. Footsteps of survivors stepping into light after years spent convincing themselves the darkness was normal. And in those footsteps, there was a pattern. A message. 3 words whispered across cities, across homes, across hearts. I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. I'm not powerless. Those words became the foundation of something far greater than anyone's story. Because somewhere along the way, the Safe House Network stopped being just an organization. It became a map. A network that reached beyond walls. Growth didn't come in a single wave. It came in layers. At first, letters. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Some handwritten. Some typed. Some sent as voice recordings, voices trembling, breaking, rebuilding in real time. They came from everywhere. Women. Men. Teenagers. Teachers. Clergy. Mothers. Daughters. Each one carrying the same thread. I saw myself in you. And I finally told someone. Those letters weren't displayed. They weren't used for promotion. They were kept carefully, quietly as reminders. Because every movement begins with recognition. Someone brave enough to say, this is real. And someone else brave enough to respond, so am I. Stories that changed lives. One letter stayed with Robyn. It came from a woman in a small rural town. The handwriting was uneven, like the words had been written through hesitation. I never thought I'd see the day someone said the things we weren't even allowed to think. It read. Because of you, I left. I started over. And now, I paint. Inside the envelope was a small folded canvas. The colors didn't follow rules. They collided, overlapped, clashed, and blended in ways that felt almost chaotic. But it was alive. Robyn held it for a long time before whispering, thank you. Across the country, Angela sat with a young woman who had grown up in a tightly controlled environment, one that blurred the line between faith and fear. They told me I'd go to hell if I left, the woman said. Angela didn't argue theology. She didn't debate belief. Instead, she slid a bus ticket across the table. Then a list of contacts. A safe house. A lawyer. A plan. Sometimes, Angela said gently, freedom starts with one decision. Christine found her purpose in listening. Not explaining. Not convincing. Listening. At one gathering, she sat in a circle with 20 women as they shared the moment they knew something had to change. When it was her turn, she spoke simply. I didn't have a dramatic moment, she said. I just realized. I hadn't laughed in years. The room fell silent. Then one woman said, it's been 4 for me. Heads nodded. Because that kind of loss, the quiet, creeping absence of joy, was something they all understood. And in that shared understanding, there was strength. Stepping onto a global stage as the network grew, so did its reach. What began in small rooms and private conversations began to move outward into larger spaces, larger audiences. Robyn was invited to speak at an international conference on survivor-led activism. At first, she almost said no. The thought of standing in front of hundreds of people again under lights, under scrutiny, felt too familiar. Too close to the life she had left behind. But Angela reminded her of something simple. You're not a character anymore, she said. You're the author. So Robyn said yes. When she stepped onto that stage, the lights didn't feel like pressure. They felt like clarity. I'm not here because I escaped something, she said. I'm here because I chose truth, even when it shattered everything I thought I needed. The room didn't erupt. It stilled. Because truth doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just lands. Christine followed with her own session, speaking about spiritual trauma and the misuse of authority. Obedience without question isn't faith, she said. It's fear. And you don't owe your soul to anyone who demands silence in return. Again, the same reaction. Not applause. Recognition. Angela closed the conference with precision and purpose. She spoke about the legal framework they had built, one that combined emotional awareness with practical protection. The law isn't just a system, she said. It's a shield when it's built correctly. And we're here to make sure it protects everyone it's supposed to. After that conference, everything accelerated. From movement to model requests poured in. Not for interviews. For collaboration. Shelters wanted to adopt their model. Lawyers wanted to join their network. Therapists wanted to integrate their approach. Educators wanted to teach their framework. Within months, the Safe House network tripled in scale. Legal advisors were placed across multiple regions. Housing support expanded into dozens of cities. Educational programs on coercive control began appearing in schools and universities. Angela taught the first class herself. Robyn published a visual memoir, an unfiltered blend of art and reflection that captured the emotional reality behind survival. Christine's audio series climbed rapidly, not because it was polished, but because it was honest. Raw, unedited, real. And it reached people far beyond the original audience. People who had never watched the show. People who didn't know the names. But who recognized the truth. When policy finally listened, then came a moment none of them had planned for. An invitation to testify before lawmakers. To speak not as subjects of a story, but as architects of change. They stood side by side once again. But this time, the stakes were different. Robyn spoke first. "Not all wounds leave marks you can see," she said. "Some of them live quietly on the inside." Angela followed. "Power without accountability isn't leadership," she said. "It's control." Christine finished. "What we experienced wasn't rare," she said. "It was just visible." The room held its breath. Then, slowly, something shifted. Conversations began. Policies were reviewed. Language changed. And eventually, laws began to evolve. Not perfectly. Not completely. But meaningfully. The ripple effect months later, an email arrived. It was simple. Direct. From a woman in a small town far away. "I left," it read. "I took my kids. I used your resources. I found a place to stay." There was a pause in the message. Then, "I'm free because you were loud. And loud because you were brave. And brave because you were broken first." That line stayed with all of them. Because it reframed everything. Their pain hadn't been meaningless. It had been the beginning. A legacy still growing. Time passed. Not in dramatic leaps, but in steady, meaningful progress. The network continued to grow. New leaders emerged. New voices joined. New stories were told. And the three women who had once been defined by a narrative they didn't control were now part of something far bigger than themselves. One evening, back at the cabin, they sat together again. No urgency. No crisis. Just presence. Robyn looked out at the horizon, the same way she had months before. "It's strange," she said quietly. "We thought the story ended when we left." Angela shook her head gently. "That was just the beginning." Christine smiled. "Stories like this don't end," she said. "They evolve." The final truth, as the night settled around them, there was no need for declarations. No need for conclusions. Because the truth had already been spoken in actions, in voices, in lives changed. They hadn't just survived. They hadn't just healed. They had built something. Something that would outlast them. Something that would continue long after the headlines faded. And somewhere out there, another woman sat in silence, questioning, doubting, wondering if what she felt was real. And, because of them, she would find an answer. Not in noise, but in something far more powerful. Recognition. Fourth part is over. Kindly support my channel. Like this video and subscribe the channel. Next part are coming very soon.